Vegeta accepts to die to pay for the Saiyans' sins, that's right. Vegeta repented of everything he did in the past and also about what the Saiyans did in the past. Vegeta's development is truly immense during Dragon Ball. But calm down, because I will explain and show you everything about what is happening with Vegeta. So without further ado, let's go. Vegeta has always been a character marked by the weight of the past. Since his first appearance in Dragon Ball Z, he carried with him the heritage of Saiyan pride and the burden of the crimes committed by his race, especially under Frieza's domination. Over time, even though he had changed, created a family on Earth, and become someone very different from the cruel warrior he once was, Vegeta never stopped feeling connected to what the Saiyans represented. This internal weight becomes even more evident in the Granola Saga when Beerus decides to train Vegeta seriously, introducing him to the god of destruction energy. Unlike Goku, who learns almost naturally, absorbing new techniques without being tied to feelings, Vegeta has always been someone tormented by his conscience. And this became clear when he could not advance in learning the energy of destruction. While Beerus provoked him, stating that guilt was being an obstacle, Vegeta clearly demonstrated that he still took responsibility for the sins of his race. He saw the Saiyans as conquerors and murderers, and even though he had been manipulated by Frieza, he felt that he was part of this dark legacy. The arrival of Granola only intensified this internal conflict. The Cerealian survivor made it clear that his race was practically exterminated by the Saiyans under Frieza's command. This made Vegeta see a reflection of his own actions and the actions of the people he represented. He, more than Goku, understood Granola's pain. This feeling of almost inherited responsibility made it difficult for him to fully unleash the destructive energy that Beerus was trying to teach. Beerus, on the other hand, saw the situation coldly and practically. For him, the past did not matter. He made it clear to Vegeta that the Saiyans had already perished and that carrying the guilt would not change the present at all. Beerus said that Vegeta had nothing to do with it because the destruction of planets and races was something natural in the cosmic cycle. In a god of destruction's view, there is no right or wrong, only the balance between creation and destruction. But this speech was not easy for Vegeta to absorb. He was never someone who simply ignored his flaws or the flaws of those he loves. Since the defeat against Majin Buu, when he sacrificed himself in an act of redemption, Vegeta demonstrated that he wished to compensate for the evil he caused. Carrying the weight of the Saiyans was part of his own identity, therefore accepting that none of it mattered was something that hurt his honor, but at the same time it was what he needed to learn to advance. This conflict is what makes his evolution in the Granola Saga so interesting. Vegeta does not learn to use the power of destruction simply by training techniques, but by understanding that to move forward, he needed to abandon the shadow of the past. Beerus constantly showed him this. To master the god of destruction energy, it was necessary to detach from regrets and guilt. Only then could the mind align with the instinct of destruction. The curious thing is that Goku at this point has a completely different trajectory. He carries no guilt for the Saiyans' past precisely because he did not live in that context. He grew up on Earth as a human and never felt connected to the legacy of his race. Therefore, he can focus only on personal self-improvement. Vegeta, on the other hand, always had a deep connection with his origin, whether through pride or the weight of guilt. This shows how, within the narrative, each one has a unique obstacle to overcome. Beerus knew exactly where to provoke Vegeta. In one of the most striking scenes, he speaks directly about the Saiyan genocide, making it clear that he himself destroyed the race's home planet. Upon hearing this, Vegeta feels a mixture of shock and impotence. But instead of reacting with hatred, he understands that Beerus was not tied to the past. This revelation was a watershed moment. Either Vegeta would learn to free himself from the weight of history, or he would never achieve the power of destruction. And it was this turning point that made the learning of Ultra Ego possible. The moment Vegeta accepts that he cannot change what happened, but can become something beyond, is when he finally accesses this energy. The transformation was not only physical or technical, but mainly mental. He let go of the guilt, although this does not mean forgetting it, and began to use it as fuel to grow. This contrast between guilt and liberation shows Vegeta's depth as a character. While Goku follows the path of instinctive freedom with Ultra Instinct, Vegeta treads a more painful path, accepting his darkness and learning to strengthen himself from it. Ultra Ego is, in essence, the materialization of this transcendence. It is a power that can only be achieved by breaking the emotional shackles that bound him to the past. The interesting thing is that at the same time Vegeta accepts Beerus' philosophy, he does not abandon his principles. He continues to be someone who values his family, who protects Earth, and who seeks to fight with his own conviction. This shows that it is not about forgetting who he was or denying the guilt, but about transforming that weight into something that strengthens him. He understands that he cannot allow himself to be dominated by guilt, but he also does not need to pretend that it does not exist. In the Granola Saga, therefore, we see a Vegeta more human than ever, a warrior who faces the weight of his history and finds a way to rebuild himself. The training with Beerus was more than a combat lesson, it was a clash of philosophy. Letting go of the guilt did not mean becoming insensitive, but learning to fight without being a prisoner of it. This learning was what allowed Vegeta to take a new step in his journey. The contrast is clear. Beerus represents indifference, while Vegeta represents the weight of responsibility. By finding a point of balance between these two extremes, Vegeta achieved something unique. He did not stop feeling, but he also did not allow himself to be paralyzed. This duality is what makes him so complex and at the same time so fascinating within Dragon Ball Super. When we think of Vegeta in the possible saga against Black Frieza, what draws the most attention is precisely how this whole issue of guilt can culminate in a sacrifice. Vegeta has always been the one who most desired to defeat Frieza, not just for personal revenge, but for what Frieza represents. He is responsible for the destruction of his people, for the manipulation of the Saiyans, and for transforming the entire race into mere pawns of his army. For Vegeta, Frieza symbolizes everything that is darkest in his history, and defeating him would be the definitive way to get rid of the weight he carries. In the battle against Black Frieza, this theme can surface even more intensely. After all, it is not just another fight against a powerful enemy, but against the one who embodies both the slavery and the shame of the Saiyans. If in Dragon Ball Z he already tried to face Frieza and failed miserably, even crying before Goku, now would be the opportunity to put an end to this cycle of pain. It is at this point that a possible sacrifice makes sense. Vegeta could realize that, even with the power of Ultra Ego, it would not be enough to defeat Black Frieza on equal terms. But at the same time, he would understand that he had the chance to protect not only Earth and his family, but also to cleanse his conscience once and for all regarding the crimes committed by his race. It would be an act of definitive redemption, no longer a regret carried in silence, but a conscious choice to give his life to destroy the Saiyans' greatest enemy. This would not be something unprecedented in his trajectory. After all, Vegeta already sacrificed himself against Majin Buu when he embraced the idea of dying to protect his family. But against Black Frieza, the weight would be much greater. It would not only be for Earth, but for his own honor and the legacy of the Saiyans. He would be giving everything he has to try to end the one who ruined the history of his race and who continues to bring suffering to everyone. It is interesting to note that Goku would probably not feel this same impulse. For him, Frieza is just a very strong enemy, an obstacle to be overcome, but Vegeta sees something personal in him, something that corrodes his soul. Therefore, while Goku would try to win with his fighting spirit, Vegeta would be willing to put his life on the line, no matter the cost. This difference between the two would make the fight even more exciting. Vegeta with Ultra Ego unleashed to the maximum, bleeding, falling, but always getting up, showing his resilience against Frieza. Every blow would carry not only power, but also the weight of his history, as if it were the last chance to free himself from the guilt that pursued him throughout his life. And it is precisely in this state that Ultra Ego strengthens. The more Vegeta is hit, the more his power increases. So it would be possible for him to take Ultra Ego to the absolute limit, perhaps even beyond what Beerus imagined. This final explosion could open the necessary loophole for Goku or even Gohan to finish Frieza. In this scenario, Vegeta would not only accept his death but embrace it as an inevitable path. This sacrifice would have an enormous impact on the Dragon Ball Super narrative. For the first time, Vegeta would not die as a villain or as someone defeated, but as a hero, putting his life on the line for the good of all and, mainly, for the desire to correct history. He would no longer see himself as guilty, but as someone who finally did what he should have done from the beginning. Face Frieza with all his might until the last consequences. And this outcome would also have a tremendous emotional weight for Goku. Seeing his rival, partner, and friend give his life so determinedly would profoundly shake him. Goku, who has always been freer, might come to better understand the pain that Vegeta carried for years. It would be a moment of maximum respect between the two, consolidating Vegeta's importance not just as a rival, but as a pillar of the story. Furthermore, the reaction of Beerus and Whis would be equally significant. Beerus, who always insisted that Vegeta needed to free himself from guilt, would see in the sacrifice not only an act of redemption, but also proof that Vegeta truly understood his lesson. He detached himself from the past, but still chose to face Frieza head-on in the name of his own conviction. Vegeta's death or sacrifice against Black Frieza would not mean the definitive end of the character. Dragon Ball has always brought back dead heroes, but a milestone in his evolution. It would be the closing of a cycle that began from when he was the cruel Saiyan prince until he became the warrior who chooses to give his life for justice. It is even possible to imagine Pan or Gohan in the future honoring Vegeta's memory, remembering that it was he who opened the way for victory. This would further reinforce the impact of his choice, showing that it was not just about a power or a technique, but an eternal gesture that would change the course of the fight against Frieza. So, a sacrifice by Vegeta in this saga would make sense not only narratively but also symbolically. He is the only one who has personal and historical reasons to desire Frieza's end so much. And by giving his all, Vegeta would find the peace he always sought. The certainty that, in the end, he managed to honor his family, his race, and himself. If Vegeta truly sacrificed himself against Black Frieza, the immediate impact would be devastating for Goku. For the first time, he would see Vegeta choose death not in search of power or self-improvement, but in a final act of honor and redemption. This would change the way Goku saw him, as he would come to understand that Vegeta always fought against burdens that he himself never carried. This recognition would make Goku fight with even greater intensity, not only to defeat Frieza but to honor the fallen partner. For Gohan, Vegeta's death would have an even greater weight. He grew up seeing Vegeta as a proud warrior, often distant but also as someone who, over time, became part of the Z-Fighters. The sacrifice would show Gohan that Vegeta was not just a Saiyan prince but also a hero willing to pay the highest price. This could even serve as a trigger for Gohan to explore even more of his beast power, carrying with him the responsibility of protecting the legacy that Vegeta left behind. Beerus, upon witnessing this act, would face a contradiction. He always told Vegeta to drop the weight of the past, but seeing the Saiyan prince choose to sacrifice himself in the name of that very past would make him reflect. Perhaps Beerus would recognize that, unlike him, Vegeta could never be indifferent, and that this was not a weakness, but a unique strength. It would be a lesson not only for Vegeta, but also for the god of destruction himself, who rarely shows genuine respect for mortals. Finally, this sacrifice would open space for the narrative to explore a new path. Vegeta's absence would leave a void in the group, but it would also create opportunities for Gohan, Broly, or even Pan to take on prominent roles. And inevitably, the promise that Vegeta could return one day, whether through Shenron, Whis, or even another divine intervention, would keep fans' hope alive. After all, even if he fell before Black Frieza, Vegeta would never be remembered as defeated, but as the warrior who finally ended the cycle of pain he carried his whole life. But comment on what you thought of all this, and don't forget to like. Thank you very much for everyone's support, and until next time.